Okay.
You want to move me?
Oh, yes.
Bye, Pat. Till later.
Bye, Kristen. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start the webinar.
Good evening, everyone. We are so happy to have you with us for the second installation of the Professional Development Workshop Series for PAiD, Public Artists in Development. We're going to give it just a moment or two to allow attendees to get in and get settled, and then we will kick off in a moment. So thank you very much. Good evening again. As I just said a few moments ago, we are taking just a minute to let participants join, find that Eventbrite link, get onto the Zoom, and we will kick it off in just about maybe 2 more minutes. Right. Good evening, everyone. I know folks are still coming in, so we'll start gently and move into the session as folks come in. But thank you again to everyone for joining us tonight. This is our second installment of the Public Artist in Development Free Professional Development Workshop Series. PAiD is a program of Los Angeles County Arts and Culture with funding from the Mellon Foundation. Tonight, we are very excited to have Kristen Sakota, the Director of Arts and Culture, here to give us some welcoming remarks. We will also introduce some of the other elements of the PAiD program, preview some of the upcoming workshops, and then dive into the topic for tonight. Please note we will spend about an hour at the end for Q&A. Throughout the conversation, you are more than welcome to start entering those questions as they're popping up. Please use the Q&A button. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can open up where it says Q&A and just type in your questions as they come up. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with everybody this evening. As noted and as shared on the screen, I'm Kristen Sakota. I have the honor of being the director of Los Angeles County's Department of Arts and Culture. As many of you know, but some of you might not be familiar with our department. And so our core mission is to invest in and advance arts, culture, and creativity throughout Los Angeles County. And we do this through a number of ways, grant making to nonprofit organizations delivering on their mission and operations in the arts education and youth development initiatives in school, out of school, and in community to expand equity and access for all youth. Civic Art, our incredible team that commission artists for original site-specific artworks in county facilities and civic spaces, as well as other work building cross-sector art strategies, artists in residence, communications, research and evaluation, creative career pathways, and so much more. But tonight, I just really want to share that one of our core values is the value of cultural equity and inclusion. And I'm really proud to say that LA County, including the Board of Supervisors and our department, have been leading on that work with our arts commissioners and in the entire community to make that a core value across all of the work we do. And that's part of why when the Civic Art team really approached me with this incredible work and thinking and learning that they had been doing about challenges and wanting to address barriers to entry in the public art field, I knew it was something to embrace. And it was very exciting. I was able to bring it to our colleagues at the Mellon Foundation and want to offer a huge gratitude for them and their investment in this program and so much more that they're doing in monuments all across the US. As you'll hear more tonight, the goal of this program is to really resource and empower artists, and especially those that have been underrepresented in the field of public art. At the Department of Arts and Culture, and myself personally, previously as a performing artist, we believe that arts and culture are vital to civic life throughout Los Angeles County. And so to do that, that means we need all of our voices reflected. So I'm very excited to help kick off this new series and glad you're with us. Please tell a friend. There's no limit to how many folks can be on these. So we are excited to have you with us. And I want to thank the Civic Art team, the Director of Civic Art, Grace Ramirez Gaston, program managers for this, Pat Gomez, Brianna, and so many more who've worked on this. And I want to thank our core partners, Dyson and Womack, as well as all of the speakers. So thanks so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thanks.
Oh, Emily, I think you're muted.
Thanks. Well, I was saying thank you as well, and that I was going to hand it over to my colleague, Allie, who is amazing in many ways, including making sure I have my mic on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie, and I'm a project manager here at Dyson and Womack. I'm very excited to be with you here tonight and introduce you to the PAiD program. So PAiD is a program of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture with funding by the Mellon Foundation, and it's a multi-year initiative that aims to advance the career growth and economic empowerment of underrepresented artists in LA County. One of the main goals of the program is to address the historical barriers that artists face when trying to enter public art, and also deal with the wider challenges that artists encounter throughout their careers. The program is made of multiple components, as you'll see on the slide, one of them being the professional development workshops. This series of workshops is designed to provide valuable skills and resources to artists of all backgrounds and career stages who are interested in public art. And we have several workshops coming up through October 2nd. And if you want to view all of the workshops, you can visit the county's website, and we'll drop a link in the chat. Another component is the PAiD Artist Council. The first open call was launched last year, and we will be launching it again this fall. And it's the council is a group of 8 selected artists who are commissioned to engage in a series of policy discussions and make recommendations to the county and to create temporary public artworks. Next, the apprenticeship is another opportunity for artists that's going to launch this fall. This open call will be managed by the county, not Dyson and Womack, but it is open to artists who have never completed a civic art or public art commission. And the selected artists will engage in a training and mentorship to complete their first ever public art commission. And then finally, we kind of talked about this, but the PAiD website. It is another resource for artists. This website is going to include all of the recordings of the professional development workshops and other resources relative to the field, but it will most likely be hosted on the county's website, and the launch of the website is TBD, but we'll be notifying all of the attendees when it launches. Thank you. Okay, as mentioned, we have several upcoming online workshops. It's a range of various topics related to public art. And the next one is on Tuesday, August 6th, and we'll be going over public art contracts. This one is going to be co-presented by Virginia Bros.
Okay.
And who is an artist herself and the co-founder of the Artist Contract. And we'll be covering kind of like the artist perspective of public art contracting and commissioning. And then another one I wanted to highlight that we have coming up is on Thursday, August 21st. And this is the public art opportunities in LA County. We're going to have several commissioning agencies all across LA County who are going to join us to directly share with you upcoming artist opportunities and offer resources on how to find and apply to these opportunities. I think it's a great one for artists to join who are looking for open calls to apply to. If you want to look at all of the available workshops and register, please go to this link in blue. I'll put it in the chat for everyone to click on.
Thank you so much, Allie.
Mhm.
So that's our introduction to the PAiD program. We're so glad that the county could join us tonight to share a bit about their approach, how this program came about. But tonight's topic is preparing a public art portfolio. As Allie shared, there are many sessions in this program, and this is one of them. Tonight, we're going to be talking a lot about some special guidance around preparing a portfolio, and also just talking about the resources and tools and approaches. We are going to spend about the next 30-40 minutes or so in dialogue around that, and then we're going to open it up to your questions. So please don't hesitate. This is super important to us that we can hear your questions, field them, try to provide some resources and some support. So ask us what's on your mind. And by us, I mean myself and our co-presenter for tonight, Irene Georges-Satsos, and I am so pleased to have Irene with us tonight. Irene is many things, and one of them is an amazing human being. And it is just an honor and a pleasure to be able to sit in conversation with her tonight. Irene is a visual artist whose daily practice of writing and drawing informs her work in clay, textiles. She is a values-driven artist professional with extensive experience in program development, leadership, and administration. Some of you may know her as well from her time at the Armory Center, along 13 years managing and directing the program of exhibitions as the chief curator and director of exhibition programs. Before this, she held prominent director and curatorial positions at LA Contemporary Exhibitions, Whitney Museum of American Art, and the Getty. She's published many things and served on many panels. She has looked at probably a fair few portfolios in the time in many of these capacities. So among her education and her background, we're just so grateful that she was open and willing to join us tonight in this conversation. And I am Emily Womack of Dyson and Womack. And we, as Kristen shared, are one of the key partners on the PAiD program. We are delivering the Artist Council program and the free workshop program on behalf of the county. And we are so thrilled to say that we have just joined with our partners at LA Commons to deliver the apprenticeship part of this program. And that is something that I know everyone is excited about, curious about, and we can certainly talk some more about, but I just wanted to highlight that. And then without further ado, jump into some ideas and some slides and just start this conversation going. And I think a great place to start is just what is a public art portfolio? A portfolio really is a visual resume that showcases skills, creativity, experience, and a public art portfolio is the same thing, but with the intent and purpose of gaining a commission in the public art field. And as someone who has worked in that field for quite some time, I am always getting questions about the differences between portfolios specifically tailored to public art, the challenges of entering a portfolio for public art if one has not already done so. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all of those key pieces, but I just wanted to lay out at the start just what it is. It's not significantly different from a portfolio you may have put together in other contexts. Again, the emphasis being that it is on showcasing public art experience or public art interest. And I'm going to say that because we'll probably talk a little bit about what we mean by public art interest as we continue. Some of the questions we're going to talk together tonight is how can artists with public art experience stand out? And how can emerging public artists craft a portfolio when they may or may not have prior experience? So I wanted to kick this off with some fundamentals and just start with a question and a comment with Irene about, the importance of visual representation in a portfolio, and about the ability to share images and play around with consistent forming and making a strong impression in that first case. So Irene, I'm going to pose that question to you first about, from your experience, why is the portfolio so important?
Sure. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, and thank you for that nice introduction and for the opportunity to be here. I'm so impressed by this program and really happy to see this work underway and see this kind of expansive take on what public art can be and who can be included in it. So I'm just very excited about what lies ahead with this conversation. You said in the previous slide, you compared a portfolio to a resume, and that's an interesting and not unapt comparison, I think, because when we're putting together resumes, when we're putting together portfolios, we are ideally tailoring the content to a specific context. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of piece of information. So I guess I just wanted to flag that. And your question now was around, can you
just how, the importance of a portfolio in terms of an artist's skill sets, like the role that it plays and the importance of visual representation of one's work?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. I mean, I've been on all sides of the table where I have seen really interesting artists represent their works in less than adequate ways, and it does not help. It's really kind of painful and discouraging, actually, to know that an artist has the capacity to meet the needs of a given project, or could be a very interesting candidate for continued discussion, but they don't advance in the process because they're just simply not representing themselves well. And it's just another, for me, in my experience, a really clear, it's just very clear the need for high level, clear, legible photography that documents your work. And we all have cameras on our phones, and we know that those can take really good photos. Maybe that can work for you. My inclination is to recommend professional photography, and certainly good lighting, really investing in having the work installed properly and lit properly and photographed properly. And then you have to crop it, and you have to make sure that your images are labeled properly. So that one image really has to carry a lot of information, and it has to be clear and succinct and legible.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that speaks a lot to the things that are on this slide as well, which is just some of the fundamentals, utilizing consistent layout, being really clear about, if you're creating this portfolio for the context of an application, what formats, what file types are required, following those instructions clearly. Again, that taking those high resolution documentations and considering that lighting, those angles. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed through here. Another thing that I think is really important in the presentation is balance. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well, Irene, because I know you've probably seen a lot of portfolios that include sketches, maybe concepts, as well as completed and finished works. And I kept finding in our prep for this as coming across this word of balance, of wanting to show range, but also wanting to show potential.
Right.
And I don't know if there's a sweet spot in that, but my gut instinct is that it's certainly wanting to see more finished works, but that there is a place and a time for sketches and concepts as well.
Yeah, I agree. And works in progress even. I agree with that. And it's interesting, this idea of a sweet spot. And we're always all of us are always looking for that. I've submitted many proposals that have not been funded. I've submitted many that have been funded. And as you noted, I've been on many, many panels and, seen a huge range. And they vary, every single one of these experiences, every single one of these panels differs from one to the next. And even if you're applying to the same organization or institution from one year to the next, you're going to have a different set of panelists with slightly different, takes. Everybody's subjectivities come into play. So I'm not sure the sweet spot is kind of it's an elusive thing, and it may be a kind of platonic ideal. I don't know that it really exists, but I do think I agree with you that balance is really important. And I agree as well that in all likelihood, the majority of the works ought to be finished works, but works that show ability, kind of capability, or show interest in a new direction, or that show concepts that haven't been funded yet, are also really valuable. I think one other idea, and I'm pretty sure we'll get to this in one way or another, but it's important to show you have the capacity to meet the needs of the project, and that extends beyond the art itself as well. The ability to manage budgets, the ability to kind of be a good communicator in your in how you represent yourself. So slides are they're the first thing people are going to look at. So when you start with that, you're really starting with the right foot forward.
That brings up something that probably should be right at the very top of this presentation, and is a good example of not doing what I'm just about to say, which is leading with your best work. That should be point number one. Putting the best work up front, not bearing it down in that portfolio, because it may not get looked fully all the way through in some instances, and some it may, but I think it's really important to lead off strong.
Yeah.
And then also just emphasizing relevant experience, highlighting public art experience where possible. We're going to have a few slides later in for artists who are specifically entering this as first timers, and some strategies you can take in that space when you don't have public art experience. But I will say, in our discussion on Monday night, we talked a lot about, the full range of things that one submits for an application, because a portfolio is just one element of this. We're really speaking just about that. But I will just highlight in bringing in a bit from that, that when you're looking at applying, read what the context says. If they're asking for 5 finished public artworks, that may not, and you don't have any, that may not be the right call. The great thing is that there are more and more opportunities coming available that are open, like the paid apprenticeship, that are opening doors for artists to be able to enter at different points in their career. So this part about relevant experience, community engagement projects, temporary projects, collaborations, and also showing works that exemplify different materials or traditional public art materials can be great ways of showing that expertise and that capacity, even if you don't have 5 public artworks under your belt. Oops. I do want to just put out some quick range do's and don'ts for us to talk a little bit about, because I think, you know, there are some fundamental things that you can really focus on. And Irene has already talked about a few of these, like that a portfolio is a living document, you know, updating it, removing maybe less relevant things as your work continues to grow and you finish projects or you work in the studio, including ranges of projects that demonstrate versatility, technical skills, focusing on quality over quantity, emphasizing works relevant to your portfolio's purpose. I think that speaks to that idea of it being specific to what you're doing. I also like to highlight the one that says about using portfolio descriptions to add context. I think that's something that's often overlooked as an opportunity in an application where, you know, if you are allowed the opportunity to provide a brief description about how that description can give some more context and give you a space where you can actually add some additional text that you may not be able to do in the confines of the application. So I'm curious, Irene, what your thoughts are about descriptions and context for work and what key information artists should include to help selection committees understand the work.
Yeah, I think this is great and it's really important. I appreciate you, your bullet point talking about being considerate of review time, and you're referencing that to lengthy videos or audio files, which is true, although often there are duration limits that are specified, you know, a 3-minute time limit of a video clip, for example, and you'll be asked to highlight where on that video, you know, what the start point is or cue it up for the start of it. But the descriptions, I think, are really, really great and really important to provide when the opportunity presents itself, which I can't even recall offhand when it doesn't. I mean, I feel like I want to say, I think it would be safe to say that there's always or almost always opportunities to provide brief keyword descriptions of your work. And again, many grants, most that I am working with, have word or character limits that you have to follow. So they really force brevity. Where they don't, I think it's worth maintaining that standard. I've looked at proposals where people have crammed text into their image files to get more. These are not text-based artists, by the way. These are artists who have a lot to say about what their images are and aren't able to resist the temptation to get all of that language into the grant. And I've seen it backfire over and over again. Same with grants that don't have those word or character limits for the description. I've seen artists go overboard, I'll say, in over explaining their work. So again, it's another one of those elusive sweet spots, but I think, and again, it depends on the grant and it depends on the context, but if I had to kind of toss out a rule of thumb now, I would say 2 or 3 sentences at the absolute maximum for a description on any single slide. Often there may be times where you would show multiple slides of a single artwork, and you don't need to keep telling the same story over and over again in that case. I think,
But it can be used, and I think this is really smart in those, if you are showing multiple slides, to choose, to highlight something specific, unique, and different. Like if you're showing process slides, if you're showing, sorry, I use the word slides because I feel like I'm back from the era
right.
where we really actually did use slides.
Right.
That is not where we are anymore.
No, we're dating ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, but so images or video files or any files that you may be using, if you're choosing to show a context slide or a sketch image or something like that, I think it's really key to tie that. This is that tailoring it piece. Again, if you have all the time in the world and resources are no issue, understand that sometimes that's not possible, but tying that that description to something that you might want the review panel to think about in relationship to the opportunity that you're applying for. So maybe it's a choice where you tried a new material or a new medium, or you tried a new process, or you could see where this piece could grow and be different. That's a 1 or 2 sentences that you could just quickly throw something in that might actually have someone go, huh, that could work perfect in this context. So it's a nice, valuable resource within the context of the portfolio, but I agree, brevity is key there.
Yeah. One thing I would also add to this is that I think it's important in any piece of, I know we're talking about portfolio images in this talk, we're emphasizing that, but in the, related to the portfolio images are the descriptions of the portfolios. And that text, along with any piece of text that you're submitting for any grant, I really strongly advise you to make sure that it's carefully edited or proofread, edited too, but really make sure that it's punctuated properly, that it's capitalized properly, because you don't want anything to get in the way of your legibility, and having to kind of slog through misspellings or oddly formatted. It's not the place. My advice for grants is really follow the directions. Don't apply your creativity to how you interpret the instructions. Really take it literally and do it specifically, and bring your best proofreading skills to bear on it as well. And have a friend read those descriptions. Get some feedback from someone. Does this make sense? The work, does this represent it accurately, and so on.
Couldn't advocate more for that peer review. It's so hard to be a good representation of oneself, that is a tough ask of anyone. And if you have folks that you trust in your community and your network that you can get some feedback on, they might even go, that image pops better, put that one closer up front, but you're really close to the one that you put up front. And so I think getting that peer feedback, it's free if you have the time to do it, is really important. There are 2 don'ts on this slide that I want to just also highlight. One is a portfolio, and in the context of public art, we are often talking about this at the stage of a request for qualifications. Our first session on applying to public art went a lot into what that means, what those different words are. If you're interested in that and they're up online, I encourage you to watch that. We will also be redoing the applying for public art session a little later in the run of events. So if you missed it and want to join, you can. But the RFQ stage is where they're looking for your qualifications, things you have done. It is not the point where you are proposing a project. And I want to, I have sat on many panels and seen people lose chances because they've included proposals for the commission that they're applying for in their portfolio. That is not, I have never seen that be something that actually is a positive for someone. So I really want to emphasize this is about prior work. In process work is fine, but definitely not a space where you want to propose what you might actually do for a project. And that's a real, I don't know if that's different in other contexts. My experience is mostly in public art. But I know in this context that is. And then again on don't go over, that's to Irene's point of following directions. Definitely don't go over what's being asked for. There's also, if you're significantly under, I think that's a balance again with the quality over quantity. If it says 10 and you've got 8 really strong images, stick with those 8. Don't feel like you've got to put those last 2 in. It might just be something that brings in doubt or shows up questions. But I think if you only put in 2, that's also a problem, I think, for artists.
Yep, agreed.
We've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but I do think it is worth kind of coming back to for a second about that balance again of sketches, fabrication in process. Like we said, there's no magic formula, but there can be a place for this. And it can be a place as well where if an artist has not had experience finishing a public artwork before, that perhaps 1 or 2 conceptual ideas, again, not a proposal for the exact thing you're applying for, might be of help. I also want to highlight inspiration and research. The portfolio is not a place for background research or inspiration photos or resources. It is really about your work. And I wonder, Irene, if you have thoughts as well about, I know you mentioned this briefly, but about how artists can tailor portfolios to align with specific themes, requirements, and is customization truly necessary for each application? I know that that's a burden on time.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that kind of through a side door, and it's to actually just underscore again your comment about not submitting a proposal when you're submitting an application. And one of the reasons for that too, another thing to think about is that public art projects are so collaborative. There's so much back and forth, and there's so much consideration given to variables that you're not aware of yet. That any artist applying is simply not aware of yet. And going in with a proposal, as exciting as it might be and as inspiring as the opportunity is, can really backfire in one way, in that it's not only is it overeager, it's kind of like suggesting perhaps a lack of awareness of the scope of collaborative work that's required for successful public art projects. It's way too early to really know what it is that's going to be required for a public art project. So there's just a lot of reasons not to presume that now is the time to share that information, particularly when it hasn't been asked for. That said, and this gets a little more to your question, Emily, is there is enough information generally in the proposals to get some sense of what type of project is being considered. Is it in a park? Is it on a city street? Is it, what are the themes? Does it deal with like the water in the sky, or, the shoreline, or some, making up themes here, but, there are, opportunities for you to kind of riff on the themes or the information that you're being given, and look at your portfolio and all the images that you have to draw from as a kind of opportunity for storytelling. So if you can kind of look at the grant invitation as a kind of inquiry, or it is an invitation, and there's a story behind that invitation. How can your slides, your images kind of illustrate that? And Emily, you spoke earlier about even things like materials, how play with different kinds of materials, practices, objects that are even completed with different kinds of materials could align with a theme, even if it's not necessarily what you had thought of when you were working on that work. So those are, I think, important customizations to allow the time for, honestly, you know. And another thing in terms of time and grants, yes, they do take time. And I really advise you not to wait until the last minute to do them. Get started a few weeks in advance, work on it, put it down, come back to it a few days later, let it marinate. It pays off if you can make that happen.
I agree. Oops.
Does that make sense? That thing about the images is storytelling for the grant application? It's a little poetic, I know, but
Yeah, I actually love that you said that, and not on this slide, but I think on the next one, when we're talking about advanced techniques, one of them is about narrative and storytelling through the portfolio. I could not agree more. I think that it's such a joy when you get to look at a portfolio that has an arc to it, you know, where it's like walking through a gallery and seeing someone's work develop over time. You know, if the capacity to build that narrative is really, if that capacity exists, it can be a real treat to look at those portfolios. So community engagement, segue. We wanted to include this as, I think, you know, highlighting experience with community engagement can be a really great thing and can be really appropriate and can actually be a nice entryway for artists who maybe don't have as many permanent public artworks under their belt. And part of that is because now more than ever, public art applications are building into them a requirement for community engagement from the artists that they commission. I know that's the case with the county. So, you know, when you're looking at that call, if you see that there is a requirement as part of the scope of work, the work that an artist would be commissioned to do, that it includes a community engagement element, it can be really great. It shows collaboration. As Irene said earlier, public art is a collaborative field. It really is. And being able to show that you have experience in collaboration, that you have experience in management of a community engagement process, that can be a really great addition to a portfolio. And it also might be something that more artists have some experience in. I didn't have a specific question for you on this one, Irene, but I'm assuming you would agree with me, but maybe not.
No, I do. And I think, you know, I guess this question around community engagement, one of the things that also makes me think, you know, I'm thinking about this whole conversation, you know, with its interest, particularly in supporting artists who maybe are new to the field of public art. And, you know, just like you may not have a finished public art project to show, you may not have direct experience organizing community engagement programs, but there are, I think, other translatable skills that you can probably identify within your background, perhaps. You know, I'm thinking about ways that volunteer experience, for example, can be something that could be presented in a way that would demonstrate a relationship to community engagement. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
You know, I was just saying, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's something I've thought about, you know, that not everybody necessarily has gone out and organized a workshop or facilitated a training or, you know, any number of the many countless other types of public art or community engagement projects, you know, parades and festivals and all of it. But there are, I don't know, chances are there's some kind of other group activity, public community-based group activity that you can draw from. And if not, I would suggest volunteering, finding organizations that or artists whose work you're interested in who work this way and see about supporting them, you know, the organization, the individual artist, and, you know, finding a way to involve yourself in some of these activities. They're all over. There's so much of this work going on, fortunately.
I love that suggestion about looking around too. If you have the chance to ask folks, if you can look at portfolios of people you admire, if you have the chance to operate in certain ways, then where you can, sorry, I just had a couple of folks walk into my space, so apologies if there were some back chat there. But what I was going to say was taking a moment to avail yourself of any peer related, colleague related support. I think, you know, we've learned a lot in many other spaces that being able to talk openly is and directly with one another opens up doors. We see that in wages, we see that in many other spaces. And I think portfolios are one of those too, where there may be a reticence. And I would love to see us be a lot more, as a community, be a lot more open about sharing that resource amongst one another and building community that way.
Oh, I so agree with that. I really do.
Yeah. So before we go to our, we have a couple more slides. This one is about some more perhaps advanced strategies for portfolio development. You may have a broad range of past projects. Again, these sessions are open to people who are coming from very different experiences, very different backgrounds, but some things that might help if you're trying to kind of, you know, maybe you've been getting projects at a certain level and you want to take a step into another financial bracket, that kind of thing with the commission values that you're looking at. The very first one is exactly what Irene was saying about considering how your portfolio tells a cohesive story that reflects your unique voice and artistic journey. That narrative piece is so important. Showcasing versatility with materials, mediums, techniques, highlighting themes and concepts. This is also one that I think is beneficial to someone who's maybe a little bit more experienced. I think it can be a really nice place to every once in a while throw in something a bit more experimental that shows innovation, that shows maybe a little risk taking. I certainly wouldn't put the whole portfolio around that, but this is a place where you want to excite people. You know, Irene, I see you're nodding your head a little bit, and I imagine you agree that sometimes that moment of like, oh, I wasn't expecting that in this portfolio can really kind of shift a tone when you're looking through a lot of different portfolios. Obviously emphasizing larger scale installations. And again, developing that distinctive visual identity. I'm curious, Irene, if you've seen examples where a narrative was really well done or where innovation was shown well in a portfolio that might, I don't know what I'm trying to ask there, but I think I'm saying like that kind of next step of taking it as a document, not just of a historical document, but a living document that speaks experiences as an artist as well as one's work.
Yeah, I love that phrase, a living document. That is really great. I'm kind of trying to do a sort of mental catalog of portfolio of proposals that I've seen, and I mean there's countless of them. So I want to say yes to your question. Yes, I can think of examples of portfolios that kind of get to that next level, although I'm hard pressed to come up with a specific one. And even if I did, I couldn't really tell you whose it was or anything. That would be confidential. But I do think you can certainly see the difference in a proposal from an artist who's more emerging than an artist that has had some experience, and but I nonetheless think that artists at any stage can produce a cohesive representation of themselves that registers the range, including those idiosyncrasies, those slight tweaks of curiosity that maybe open up a pathway to a new idea or a new direction, you know, and that kind of excitement, I think, is really important when, you know, when putting together your portfolio, and certainly excites the jurors that are looking at the projects, you know, looking at all the proposals that are coming in. I'm not sure that's really answering your, or how that's addressing your thoughts, Emily, but yeah, I think that obviously artists with more experience have the advantage of having had more experience. They have more images to draw from. They can kind of craft narratives with they're on a longer bench, you know, or deeper bench, or whatever the sports analogy is there. But I think at any level, we have the opportunity as artists to kind of tell our stories and illustrate our stories with our slides. And that's really what we're talking about. And when I say that too, another point that reminds me of that I want to make is that a kind of like telling our stories, like really make it your story, you know, applications rather, that try too hard to kind of give the funder what they want. This may sound counterintuitive, but funders are looking for exciting, and people who are commissioning public art proposals are looking for exciting new ideas. They want to see new, fresh, you know, energy and ideas. And so it is a good place to be your bold self and get your ideas out there.
I agree. On that same note, and I really agree with you, and thank you for making that point about, like, that isn't necessarily something that needs an advanced, you know, that anyone can build a narrative around who they are and how their work reflects that. And that's such a good strategy. We did want to share a couple of tips for those first-time public art applicants. Breaking into the public art world, as we all know, as we all have heard, and is incredibly challenging. There are many opportunities in there, but there are far more people seeking those opportunities than there are opportunities. I do, as I shared before, do see a lot of growth and strength in agencies diversifying calls, offering commissions at different ranges. LA County is incredible in the range that they offer in that way. And I also want to just say, you know, a lot of what we're talking about in this is strategies that artists can take. But I want to be very cognizant that, you know, not all of the work is on the artist's shoulders. Commissioning agencies have a equal, if not greater, responsibility to diversify their approaches to working with artists. And so I want to say that point blank, and also highlight that, yeah, bigger picture, and highlight that part of the PAiD work, not in this series is really about work for providing skills, but that part of the program of PAiD is looking at that more systemic space of relieving the barriers, addressing the barriers from the agency and commissioning side. But what we're looking at tonight are some of the ways that artists can also work through that challenging and currently challenging landscape. So emphasizing relevant experience through non-public art projects. Showcasing projects that may have crossover with public art related skills. I think that's exactly what Irene was talking about before, around really thinking laterally about your experience and where certain things might show a skill. Installations, community engagement, collaborations, different materials. Again, strategically using concept sketches, not proposals, but concept sketches you may have come up for other things, balanced with studio work, can show an eagerness to take your work to another level, can show an eagerness to kind of take on that next challenge. Again, utilizing those work descriptions the artwork descriptions. And then I also want to talk about, you know, the range of opportunities that do exist that might be jumping off points, like temporary public art projects that typically have a lower commission value, but are a great way to kind of get one's foot in the door into this field. So I think that is also a really nice space. We talked a little bit, though, about feedback on portfolios and asking for feedback. And I guess my other question for Irene was for artists who are just kind of starting out, like, how important is that, getting that peer-to-peer feedback and to refining the work and the approach to a submission?
Well, I think it's really important. I think that I just really think it's important. I think, many of us can get very I don't know, kind of like we have our work and we're focused on our work, and we can get, I don't know, myopic maybe. We can get kind of like really engrossed, and our focus can get so honed and so narrowed on what we're doing that it can be hard to step back and find the I don't know, make the room to consider whether or not the thing that has been absorbing you so much in your work actually is as legible as you think it is, or when you're putting your portfolio together, your sequence, the way you're sequencing your images, or the ones that you choose to put in, you may think this is so great, this makes so much sense, but you're awfully close to it, and that can be a great place to be, certainly for production, but when you're making it public, why not get another person's perspective, and I just think it's really important. And I know that it's not always easy not everybody, some people have enormous peer-to-peer networks, other people don't necessarily. So you need to, I don't know, think about that. Think about if there's ways to cultivate that, which maybe is not the most helpful thing to say right here. But one thing I will say is that in many cases, and I don't know if this is a policy with County Department of Arts and Culture or not, but I know that in many cases, agencies will do they will look at your slides, or they will look at your material in advance and give feedback. Obviously, there are probably some that don't, probably most don't, but I think it's always worth asking, and again, that's another reason for getting your proposal together, draft proposal together well in advance, so that you can find some people, perhaps even someone from the agency, to spend 10 or 15 minutes looking at it and saying, yeah, it looks good, but your descriptions are too long, or I don't understand why you have these 3 slides in, or you're not going to get a yes or no on whether you're getting funding, but you will get some feedback, and it's worth asking to see if the agencies do that. And I just think it's definitely worth sharing your proposal with ideally other artists, just to get get some feedback.
And even if they can't look at them in advance, which I think might be more complicated with government agencies, there's a lot of rules about those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But I think that point of asking for feedback, you can always ask for it once you've been reviewed, if you get a no or yes. And I think in both instances, I am a huge advocate of asking for feedback. So whether you have been, positive and received the next step in it or not, I think asking for feedback is a valuable resource that many artists, for very, very understandable reasons, don't do. But I just want to say, I have never met someone who was an agency, a commissioning group, anyone who did not want to provide feedback, who was not welcoming and willing to provide feedback. And so if we can, if it's possible to get over those fears there, it's a really great way to hear how one can improve. And then I will say, everyone who is working in this field will receive rejections. You are never going to get all of the things you apply for. And so it also is a great way to kind of build up some fortitude around that because it doesn't just end with that harsh no. It opens a dialogue, and it allows you to kind of turn that into a space that can actually maybe be a positive.
I completely agree with that. And I would add too that you're, in a sense, even if your proposal isn't funded, and let's be real, most of them aren't, not to be harsh, just to be realistic, what you're still getting when you're submitting your application is a review by a group of people who have been brought in to look at your proposals. And that's kind of amazing. It's not the same as a studio visit, but it is focused attention by a group of people who are there as jurors looking at your work. And that's like getting your calling card into the hands of, however many jurors there are. That's not insignificant in and of itself, regardless of where it goes. And I will say that I have actually pursued conversations with people artists whose proposals I reviewed that weren't funded by the panelists by the panels that I was part of, but I have gone on and established other relationships with them and developed other projects. So it is not a wash if you're applying for a grant and don't get it by any means.
Same.
I say that, yeah, I mean, I know it's discouraging and disheartening, but remember that there are good things about it.
I agree. That led very well into the last about like many emerging artists feel intimidated by the prospect of creating public art. And my last question was about what advice you would give them in terms of overcoming self-doubt and confidently presenting their work.
Oh gosh, I think in a sense, one thing that I don't know why this is the first thing that's coming to mind, but one thing that is important to remember is that in a way you're doing them favors, right?
Yes.
All of these agencies are putting out proposals because they need your ideas. They need our ideas. And yes, obviously they have a lot of power. They get to decide which they want to go with and which they're going to say no thank you to. But, remember that you're giving that's a powerful position that you have, and as an artist responding to these solicitations for ideas. So if they don't want it, it probably wasn't a good match to begin with, and because it is so collaborative, and that's, you want to be able to work well with whoever you end up eventually working with, on a public art project or a public art project. So I guess it's, it's a long haul. It's full of little, disappointments along the way. I know it well. But if you can kind of separate yourself out from it in that way, in some sense, it can help. And I think Emily's right. You do it and you start to develop a somewhat thicker skin around it too.
Mm-hmm. I also think realizing you don't have to apply to everything. Like being strategic in what you choose to apply for, making sure you have the capacity to do the application, to take on that mental toll, taking that self-scan for a second, being like, is this right? When I read this, does this feel like something that I want to participate in? Irene is so correct. It is such a collaborative space. I wanted to highlight a few creative strategies as well. Just, one of the things that I know could be super helpful for artists in this space is skill swaps. Who do you know that's a photographer? Can you give them a drawing, a print, and swap some skills for some support with photography? That's a great space. Looking for tips on high quality photos, as Irene was saying, even if you're working with smartphones and doing do-it-yourself lighting, there's a lot of resources that are available now that can help to really do that. And I would say that's to the next point of actually prioritizing those things that you can control. There are many things in this scenario that you can't control, the review panel, all of these things, but where you can, and giving yourself time, that also I think speaks to that ability of feeling confident about it, because what you have done was to the best of what you could do. So I think that's a great thing. We've mentioned many times about showing work to peers, and then you're here. So you've already done the last one. You've looked for forums, you've looked for opportunities. So congrats on doing that. Many folks aren't here, and you are. So that's a huge step already in building that community of support and as you progress in this area.
You know, one other thing on the photos, because I've been thinking a lot about this myself, actually, for my own personal reasons. But your comment, Emily, you can, like, you know, work with someone and trade a drawing or something like that. And you can even trade mutual support on photography. Like, I've got lights, you've got a camera, or I have big work and I need help moving it. And, you know, you can even just help each other shoot each other's work. It's much easier to shoot work. Well, it can be much easier to shoot work when it's a two-person process. Little footnote there.
I agree. I think this is our last slide. Again, this speaks to what I was saying earlier about, you know, being real about the inequalities and the resources and the gaps in resources that exist. This program is meeting our world where we are, the public art landscape where it is, and wanting to provide support and resources doesn't mean there isn't a lot of work to do to make it a different world that we want it to be. I know that, you know, accessing professional photography and professional softwares, that can be really difficult, accessing mentorship and networking opportunities, all of those things. And I encourage you guys to really also to continue to utilize this program. But I think those notes on the right side would be some of my final thoughts around it, about giving yourself time and compassion. I know we've spoke about this briefly, but looking really closely at what a commissioning agency's stated values and goals are, and assessing whether that's something that you want to participate in. You know, that can mean the difference in getting a commission and not getting a commission. It can also mean the difference of having a good experience with a commission, and trusting your judgment on those calls. And then also, again, accessing opportunities like this. So those are my kind of final, I'm just going to make sure. Yeah, we're going to questions next. So I'll just say, Irene, if there's anything else you'd like to share or say, or are we ready to dive into questions?
Yeah, thanks. One thing I just am thinking about, and you touched on this earlier when I think if I heard you correctly, it was a quick comment that you made about the landscape of public art commissions and how that's changing. And the fact even that this is happening, you know, that PAiD is, you know, that this whole work that we're sitting here and doing right now is even part of a process, shows that the field is changing. And so again, your contributions in the form of applications, for example, your questions, all of these things are actually really influencing this work being done in the field, this work that really needs to be done for all the reasons that Emily has outlined, you know, the barriers and so on. So yeah, just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. Okay, so Allie is online to help us navigate our questions, and we have many, and we're going to get through as many of them as we can.
Okay. The first one we got was, in your experience at different panels, do jurors check the portfolio or only check social media? I feel like they're asking if they check either or.
Yeah. Irene, we can just jump in whenever you
Sure.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my experience, the portfolios are what lead, for sure. You know, that's like the level playing field. And that's what you're tasked with looking at, are the slides or the images that you're submitting. So in my experience, there are times where if a juror maybe doesn't understand something, they may, well, can I talk for a second about how panels often work?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so panels can be of varying sizes. The last one I was on was actually not for a civic entity, but for a private foundation, and I think there were 5 or 6 of us panelists. And sorry, I don't remember exactly how many applications there were. Let's say there were 60, and each panelist was assigned 10 applications to present on, but every panelist was expected to look at all of the applications. So our jobs were to kind of do a presentation on each of those 10. And I know that, and that's not an uncommon way of doing it. That's a slightly smaller applicant pool. For larger grants with larger applicant pools, a lot of that work is done, well, it depends, it's done a variety of ways. Usually there's a portal and you rank, and that's how it's done. But the slides are what you're looking at. Sometimes when there's more, when a presenting juror might want a little bit more information, they may go online and do a little bit more research to find something that may or may not actually help the artist. Again, as clear as you can be in your application is good. But I don't want to suggest that slides aren't looked at and that only social media is looked at, because it's definitely not my experience at all.
I want to introduce, we have with us Pat Gomez as well from LA County, who's kindly here to also provide a little resource from the LA County perspective, because I know their systems are really unique and specific to them. So Pat may jump in and share some things from the county's perspective too, whereas Irene and I are probably speaking a little more broadly.
Well, first off, I'd like to say I'm very impressed by all of the guidance that you've been providing to everybody, and I have found that it's pretty on the nose. In regards to this last question, I would actually say that it's the opposite of the question, in that we really look for the panelists to focus on the submission portfolio materials. We're not looking for them, the panelists, to start going on their own online and having that other type of an exploration. And that is because we want all of the panelists to come into their discussions with the same information. And the idea is that the artists are putting forward the face they want to put forward in that submission, and that's what we want to honor in that panel.
Echo and agree. Portfolio is key. Some places don't even allow jurors to look at other things. And the caveat would be, if they ask for a social media handle, then assume that they might look at it. But if they don't, it's in every instance I've been in, it's been the portfolios.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't even think of grants that ask for social handle medias. Maybe.
Next question is it viable to include street art, non-commissioned public art in the portfolio in terms of completed public art examples? Oh God, so they're asking if it would be practical to include street art, which is not a civic art commission, in
Yeah. Something maybe someone's done without the backing of an agency. I don't have any problem with including that in the portfolio of work. Do you?
No, not at all.
Yeah, we're not the police, so we want to see your best work.
Yep.
And that's really what you need to focus on.
Okay. Someone asked, a lot of public art applications are open for beginners. Oh, open for beginners or for muralists or 2D artists. Do you have advice for those who make objects on how to gain entry, build our portfolio in public art?
Actually, I would say that if you are already working 3-dimensionally in objects, that you kind of have a leg up on some of these projects, because I know on our end, we have more opportunities for projects that are not 2D based, that are there is the desirability for something more sculptural or, you know, more interactive with the environment, maybe installation based, something of that sort that does address the idea of 3 dimensions. So if you're working with sculptural work, that's great. If you're working with sculptural work that happens to utilize materials occasionally that have some permanence to them via glass, metal, concrete, whatever it is, that's great too.
I would say agree to some degree with you, Pat. But I also think that because there's a lot of requirements around a permanent 3-dimensional sculpture, that if you only have studio practice work, I have seen instances where it has been hard for juries to make the leap that they could see that that 3-dimensional work could translate into something that would be appropriate for a public artwork. And so I also want, it's not just about working in 3-dimensional. I think there's skills that one can show about how materials you could translate. And I think this is where the letter of interest is super important. We talked about that a lot in our first session, excuse me, about being able to say, I could see the aesthetics of this piece becoming, you know, translating into metal, ceramic, glass, you know, thinking through the materiality that would work well in a public art context could help in that space as well.
No, I did not mean to discourage 2D. Far from
No, I don't think you
far
were.
from it. I just wanted to not discourage people who are doing sculptural work.
Someone asked if a request for images is not specific to the number or images per page. Could one offer 4 or even 6 images of a work, like different angles or details on one page, or would this seem too ambitious? Pat.
Yeah, I touched on that earlier. I would be extremely cautious about doing that. That's I was talking about that in the context earlier of using slides as spaces to add more text. But I've seen the same thing that you're describing, where it becomes this kind of kaleidoscope of images on one slide, and it's it can backfire. So I would do that exceptionally judiciously if you had to.
I agree. And I would read those requirements, because some places, when they mean one image, they mean one image. They do not mean 5 images on one page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how much weight is typically given to the letter of interest or artist statement versus the portfolio?
Oh, I'm so curious to hear Irene and Pat's answer to this.
How do I answer that? Pat, you want to answer that first, or should I take it?
I'll answer it first. From my observation, is that the first thing people look at are the images.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, that is the first thing. That is your first impression. Then they'll go in and they'll read. And then they may come back and look at the images again, because what they've read might provide them with additional insight into what they're looking at for the images. And of course, it's the other information that they're looking to glean. But I would say that it's just, we're an image-based society, and it's just a natural thing for people to want to look at the imagery. And also our panels will likely include artist professionals in the field who are also very visual people. So, you know, that phrase, a picture provides 1,000 words, or however that goes, it's kind of true.
I can tell you that when I'm what you said, Pat, I look at the images first for sure, and then look at the statement, and really appreciate a well-written statement. gotta say, really like that. It often sends me back to the images again. Usually, I always look at the images more than once. When I'm on panels, what I tend to do is go through all of the applications, looking at all of the images for everybody, and then I go back and look at each one in more detail, and that's when I do the ranking. So I take a first pass without ranking anything.
I really appreciate hearing that from both of you, because I think that's very common to look at the images first, then read the letter. And I also think that's a great tip that we didn't have in here, which is look at your own application that way. Look at the images, then read your letter as a method of kind of seeing, like, does that add something? Does that make me rethink about these images? Does it relate to those images? I think that's a really nice suggestion on the editing front too, to kind of look at them that way yourself.
Okay, is it better to put the best image at the front or the one that is most similar to the kind of project they're asking for?
I noticed that this question has the word best in quotes, which I really appreciate. And my inclination would be to say, put your strongest work, the work that you feel is your strongest work, or that you, after your review with your peers, have determined is the strongest work in terms of how it's represented on your images. That I would lead with that. That would be my advice. The thing that they're asking for is usually, it's often so general and it's often subject to some change. I don't know that I would try to hit that target.
I so agree. And it's also subject to so much interpretation about what they're looking for, and the best in quotes is always a strong lead.
How would you suggest showcasing a large detailed work when there's an image limit? Would you recommend adding a detailed image versus hoping a panelist will zoom in?
For me, I think this goes to that point of getting peer review when possible, because I think it is so hard. Irene said this earlier, you're so close to the work and there might be a detail that you think is so essential that when others look at it, they might go, not as important to me. And I saw the work, and so I think there's nothing that is gonna answer that more for you than showing it to people. That being, without the opportunity to do that, if you're gonna include a detail, 1, at most 2. If there are like 3, 4, or 5 details, and I'm talking about when you have like a standard of maybe 10 or 15 images, maybe 20, if there's like 5 or 6 of one piece, there's a limit where it's not really informing the panel of anything else at that point. And details, I don't know, that's my opinion, but I'm curious about what you think, Irene.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I think details have their place, but I think overdoing them is a problem. And I think you gave a good kind of framework there for thinking about that.
Right.
Describing the community engagement aspect has always been challenging for me. I have completed several public art projects in New York City and Palm Springs, etc., and I've not had much community engagement experience in my work. Is this seen as a negative?
Pat, what are your thoughts?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a negative. It's really, the question is, are you interested in doing it? And I think actually that's one of the reasons that we're doing a whole panel session on community engagement, because this is an area that can be confusing to artists, and it's very important to us that our work resonates with the community, that there is that community engagement aspect, but that's kind of a big it's a big area to fill in. There's a lot of forms that community engagement can take. And there's a lot of ways that community engagement can either work to inform the artwork itself or to help a community to embrace an artwork and understand an artwork. There's different goals and ways that community engagement can work. One of the reasons we were very interested in seeing that community engagement is a panel session all on its own is because we know that sometimes artists that are new to public art will come in and that kind of stymies them a little bit. And sometimes they have a difficult time retaining their artistic voice while they're doing community engagement. So there's a balance there of having that connection to the community and retaining and being responsive to the community, which is very important, but also you want to retain your voice as an artist. And so that's the balance. And so that is what we're going to have a whole session on it, and I really highly recommend it.
I have a couple, I guess a question or thought or both. It's great to hear, Pat. I also find myself thinking about, and I don't have a question for this, but just thinking about the funding agency's role too in the community engagement piece of it, and what are all the considerations in terms of what part of that is the artist's work and what part of that is the agency's work? Not everybody is temperamentally suited, not everybody's interested, and people can produce extraordinary works that have great impact without necessarily being the ones to be the public face of community engagement projects. And what was I going to ask you? Oh, I wonder if in terms of this inquiry, what you would think about the artist who has yes, completed several public art projects in New York and Palm Springs. I wonder what it might involve to speak to whoever commissioned those projects in those cities and get more information about what public engagement might have happened on the funding side and kind of connect that to the story of the work, even if the artist themselves weren't the ones initiating or facilitating or driving that public art work.
That's a really great point, because it may happen outside of the context of the artists in ways, associated with the project, and finding out if there was any engagement done, and also I do agree with both, it is not something that is required in every, let me back up, not required, but sometimes it is, but it is not required as an artist to always be great at community engagement. There are many skills that artists bring to the table. That is one skill that some artists choose to bring to the table. And I would reiterate that to saying, I think that's part of that analysis of calls, of really reading the language of what an agency is asking for, of really like, if they're going community, 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 take them at their word, they're meaning that, and if it's maybe, okay, I think analyzing that opportunity is also smart, might save you some time from applying to something that really isn't a good fit.
Yeah, and I would also say that, I mean, in terms of the county, we ask for that plan or a preliminary plan at the point in which would be basically the second step when if you're selected to be a finalist and you're providing us the overall proposal. But we very clearly state and believe that community engagement, there's no one size fits all. There's no one way. We explicitly state it can happen at any point during the project, meaning that it can be something that if you're an artist that wants to work that way, you can engage in a number of sessions or workshops or whatever to help to identify actual design components of your piece. And that would be a much more of a interactive process that the artist is engaging in up front. But we're perfectly okay if that's not relevant to your practice as an artist. We want the artist to be true to their practice. So it may be that once the design is set your community engagement is perhaps doing a presentation to the community that where it's going to sit and talk about your work and talk about your history of your work, or do some type of presentation so that it's kind of an artist talk. So there's everything in between. So that's basically what I would say is there's no one way to do that.
Thank you.
We have a few questions about public engagement. Someone asked, I've had peers say it's not a good idea to show collaboration images in the visual portfolio. Say community artists or families working on the piece in the public park. I've been advised to describe in words in the letters or narratives. Please weigh in.
I would say that also goes back to this one size fit all, to really looking at what the call is asking for. If again, there's a real emphasis on community and public engagement, then I think emphasizing that in your portfolio, showing you've done that work, would not be a bad thing. If it's not asked for, it's not spoken about, not brought up at all, then it may be less important, valuable to the panelists that are looking at it. Another clue is reading. Most calls include, the evaluation criteria. Most times the evaluation criteria is publicly put forward. If there is no criteria that talks about that, you kind of know what they're wanting to see in the portfolio, what they're going to be judging that against. That's a really good clue as well. But I would say that advice is maybe a little too strict that you've received, and that it could be part of the changing landscape where that is more accessible to include that type of work, and that it certainly would be based on a responsiveness to what the call is asking for.
That being said,
Yeah. Go on, Pat. Yeah.
I would like to also say that think about the purpose of the request for qualification and the review, and that's to understand your work and the quality of the work and the kind of work that might be generated if you receive the commission. So if you're going to show a photo or two, I would be sparing in that way, because really the majority of the portfolio, we're going to want to see the work itself.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Pat. I have been on a little bit of a mini jag lately about the amount of images that show people sitting in a park at a table with scraps of paper, or and it looks great. You can tell people are having fun, but you have no idea what's going on. And it could be an art project, it could be something, it could be anything. It doesn't, as to Pat's point, show the content of the work at all. I worked on a project a number of years ago, gosh, 20 something years ago, at a park, and the piece was it was called A Magic Carpet, and in putting that in air quotes, but that actually was the title, Magic Carpet: Home. And it was a piece by the artist Maria Elena Gonzalez, and it was a floor plan of an apartment from the adjacent housing complex, typical floor plan of the adjacent housing complex. This was in a park in a neighborhood in Watts that was surrounded by public housing. And the idea was that the object, it was a wooden platform that undulated, kind of like, imagine a magic carpet flying through the air. And the most amazing thing happened. As soon as it was built, it was put up, there was the opening reception, and I don't know why I didn't anticipate this, but kids immediately brought their bikes and began riding along this magic carpet on their bikes. And those were amazing images, seeing this sculpture be used by people in ways that we didn't foresee, sort of naively. And you really could see the artwork, and you could see how it was being used. And that, for me, in my experience, is a kind of, benchmark of public art in use and documentation of it that shows the work and shows how dynamic.
Well, I would love to see that picture.
I'll send it to you.
Just for the sake of time, I might combine these questions, but one is, how does one include a possible collaboration with a peer for community engagement in a portfolio? And what are some tips when you're proposing a community engagement concept for the first time?
Hmm.
Oh, that's a good one.
I guess I would want to know is, um, if the question means that you're looking to create work on a collaborative basis with an artist that you haven't collaborated with, which is kind of a separate question than the community engagement question. I feel like there's kind of two things going on with this question. Um, Again, I would think about the portfolio as the way of communicating the art, the work that to give an idea or a glimpse into how an artwork might be created for a particular opportunity. So that's really at the top of mind in really of these things is to look at the work. Now, if you're two artists that have never collaborated previously, that makes it a little bit more of a challenge to sort of communicate how your aesthetics might meld working collaboratively, because there's no experience working collaboratively. If you have worked collaboratively and have had an artwork that has been generated from that, certainly you're going to want to put that in your portfolio for sure, because that's going to be a direct understanding for those panelists as to how that work is going to be might be approached for the particular project. But if you haven't done that, there is you certainly want to show both artists' work, but you're also going to want to perhaps in your narrative talk a little bit about how you might see your aesthetics working. It's just basically trying to communicate. Think about this. I mean, I know it feels, it's a competition and all that, but it's also really think about it as a communication. You're trying to communicate to these panelists what type of work, like, is this work that they're seeing work that is exciting, and is it relevant to this project, but also how might it be approached or to this particular opportunity, and you just want to give them as much of an information as much information as possible.
I agree. And I also am echoing Ellie's sentiment about questions and time. So I'm gonna suggest that maybe one of us take each question going forward. So we try to get as many answers as possible in.
Thank you. Can it help or hurt to include work samples that include only project management for another artist or company, or curatorial projects or programming in the portfolio, or should it be on the resume?
I think the question is asking if you are wanting to show that you're going to collab with another firm for project management and support to show skills that you could bring into play, whether you show that other group's work in the portfolio. I would say, I think if you do, it would be very sparingly, and I think for the most part, it should be your I think mentioning that you would work with this organization, group, or firm for support in the letter, maybe referencing that as what their experience would bring specifically would be great. But I don't think, to Pat's point that she was answering in the previous question about the showing a consistent collaboration, would probably be more important than that.
As a glass artist, I have 15+ years experience in residential and commercial projects. And now I do want to make the crossover to public art installations. When you talk about scale, how big is big?
Um,
Go ahead, Irene.
Well, I mean, I feel like this might be one for you, Emily. I mean, it can vary, I guess I want to say. I mean, residential and commercial projects are probably just as objects, as your final objects are probably smaller scale than what might be sought in calls for proposals for public art installations. I don't really know quite how to answer that specifically. I don't know.
I would say that the calls should be very clear about the space and the location that they're talking about in most instances, giving you a sense of that. But I think how big is big? It's all over. We could be talking building scale, extra large building scale. It really is dependent on what is being sought, and there's so many different opportunities at many, many different scales.
Will there be workshops in how to make portfolio and how to apply in a simplified way for artists with limited experience?
I would highly recommend you join the next iteration of the applying to public art calls. That does start at a little bit more of a limited experience space. It really goes into definitions, into each element that goes into an application. Allie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could look up for me when you have a second, the date of when that one is, and maybe drop that in the chat, because we are doing that one again in this series.
The next portfolio workshop will be on September 12th,
And the applying to public art open calls,
the day before, September 11th.
excellent. So September 11th is the one that I think would be most relevant to this question.
If you have poor photos of the few public artworks you've done, is it better to leave them out? Especially when it's small projects like a mosaic trash bin.
Oh, this is tough. I mean, I want to ask you, if it's possible to go back and shoot them and get some better photos, if the mosaic trash can is still, in existence, if any of these public artworks you've done can be rephotographed, it might be worth your time. I'm gonna tell you something that kind of defies what I've been saying all along about take really good photographs. I have actually been on panels. I can think of one example where I was on a panel, and it was a civic panel. And there was an artist that had really inadequate documentation, but the work was so intriguing that it kind of, surmounted that limitation of the poor documentation. So I'm not saying it can't happen, but I think no one is doing themselves a favor if they're submitting poor documentation. It's a hurdle. It's a thing to overcome. So I'm not quite sure what specific advice to give you about whether or not to include documentation is poor. Maybe a small one slide, or two slides if that's all you have. But I don't know. I know we want to move through questions, so I'll resist from asking Pat or Emily what you think, but that's my opinion.
I would like to just really quick, I'm sorry, I know we're short.
Sure.
Just jump in and say, I would evaluate your work, and you mentioned it's a mosaic that happens to be a trash can, but if you have other mosaics that aren't up in a public space, but they're mosaics and you have a good documentation for them and they represent your work well, I would say that would be something you would want to perhaps consider inserting instead.
I am applying to an RFQ which requires a brief discussion about the conceptual design you would propose. Would it be inappropriate to include a sketch of the potential proposal to help define the concept if it was not explicit in the call for artists?
Again, I can't speak to the exact RFQ that you're applying to. And that can be tough if there is an open period where you can ask questions, which there often is with these. If that hasn't passed yet, I would ask this question for sure to them. Because they would be the best folks to be able to say whether they're entertaining that. But and if that window is closed for asking questions, also you could read they often have to release the Q&As, and maybe another artist might have asked that same question. So I would definitely look at that, but I would absolutely say my advice is to not propose, to really resist that urge. I have never seen that be a positive for someone.
For first-time applicants, is there a way to leverage other relevant skills and experience from day jobs, i.e. project managing, community-led building projects, installations done for clients, etc.? Would this be done on the CV, or is there ever space to include this kind of work in the portfolio?
The portfolio would really need to be the artwork that you do, your studio work, because that's really the place for you to convey your artistic voice and your work as an artist. In terms of other types of experience, you could, include it in the CV. I think might be a spot for it if it has work that has relevancy to being able to project manage, and maybe in your letter of interest you could, put a sentence or two in there that would indicate that you have this type of experience and could, manage a public art project. But what the thing in the end that's very important is your own artwork, and your own to convey your own aesthetic as an artist.
Curious on your thoughts on utilizing AI to assist in showcasing exciting ideas outside of your budget as an emerging artist. Example, for large-scale visualizations that may not exist in the real world.
I mean, I think my question on this is are these artworks that you're making? Are you using AI as a tool to create large scale visualizations that are also artworks? I can think of a number of artists who are doing just that. They're creating these kind of hypothetical environments, imagined environments that are that kind of function as the artwork itself. So I guess I'm a little confused about what you're asking. If you're suggesting that these are proposals, or if your artwork is utilizing AI, like that's in a sense your medium. I don't see a problem with AI as a medium.
I think the same rules apply. If you are utilizing it as a way to propose a concept sketch because you don't have much experience doing things, it's a delicate balance. There are risks involved with doing that, and I would certainly stay away from doing it as a proposal for the call you're applying to. If it is a way of working, a medium, as Irene was saying, 100%. Go for it.
This one's about feedback. I found that I received minimal feedback on applications. Are you saying we should email someone a part of the agency before the deadline?
I feel like this might refer to something I had suggested earlier, that in some instances, the funder can be approached. But Emily made a very good point when I said that it's typically not a reality in civic funding for civic funding agencies for many reasons. So I think I'm going to just underscore a comment or advice that Emily gave earlier about looking to see when there are sessions that the funders are holding to answer questions, and if those have passed, see what is posted about questions that have been raised through that process.
I hear as well what you're saying about you might get minimal feedback when you ask for feedback after an announcement has been made. And, it is different. I think it's also okay. It is also absolutely okay to ask for more. If you get back something that's like, you could say, could you elaborate on that? I'd love to hear a little bit more. But it also says a lot about the agencies, and if they're not able to give a lot of information, it just, that they might be at capacity, they might be, understaffed, there might be other reasons. But I think advocating for information after is never a bad thing.
If you were asked to attach a PDF portfolio with 10 items, what would it look like? Would it look like one image per page with text? Or it would be great to see some examples of portfolios if you have are there free formats or resources available?
PDF portfolio with 10 items.
In my experience, at this point, yeah, this is a good question because it asks us to be clear about our language. In my experience these days, there are very specific instructions about how to upload your images. And so your portfolio, once upon a time, just like slides used to be an actual tangible thing, once upon a time portfolios were actually things that you'd carry around physically and show people. But at this point, yes, PDFs, all of those other ways that we have of presenting our images. But when it comes to submitting these, your slides, your images on grant applications, I just want to say there's always instruction about what form they want you to use. And often there's, gosh, I'm forgetting the names of some of the ones that are so common now, but there are platforms that are, I don't know, Pat, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's a submittable slide room. I mean,
Yeah.
the point being that our agency, as well as pretty much all the agencies that I'm aware of, we have actually online platforms where artists upload or input their application. And there's very specific direction as to how those images, what can be in the image and how many images and the format of the images. Are they JPEGs, PDFs, or whatever? And different agencies have different rules, but for us, we absolutely want only one image of an artwork per uploaded file for the total maximum period. And when people, if they want to, put a lot of images on there, then and it's excessive in that way, we could potentially disqualify them for not following directions. So, because it's really about fairness and all of the artists having the same opportunity to have work being considered as everybody else's.
My public art experiences are mostly collaborative work, assisting the other artists and volunteer works. I wonder how I can build portfolio based on my experience, since some of my works can violate copyright issues.
God, I feel like
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's fine.
Say this reminds me of a question that Pat addressed earlier in terms of how the slides need to be your work. But yeah, what were you going to say, Emily?
I was gonna say, I have seen things where, and again, these tend to be in maybe not those like really big commissions, maybe in like temporary things or smaller commissions or commissions like, actually, quite frankly, like the Artist Council, where we were specifically asking artists for where we were really interested in how their other experiences related to their practice. So I would say, one, look for things that might be open to bringing in those other experiences. Now, the copyright issue is if you do not have permission to include, maybe you were a volunteer, you helped a muralist, you worked on it. If you do not have permission from the artist whose name is on that mural to show that piece, you absolutely should not do that. And you should not credit it as your work.
Yeah, I would say that this is sort of a kind of a little fraught. To include work that where you were a volunteer. Let's say you were somebody who worked on a mural and you were not the main artist who designed that mural, but you are maybe had a great, showed some skill in helping to fabricate or paint the mural. But we're looking for you to present your ideas. So we're really going to be more interested in your artistic voice. It could be your studio work or anything of that nature. If you're one thing that can backfire is I've seen a presentation where somebody, worked with somebody, there's an artwork that's out there, it's a public artwork, and they will say, present it, and they're not making it clear that they were there as a volunteer, and it was sort of, gray area the way it was described. And then somebody on the panel, because these people on the panel know what's going on out there, they were familiar with that work, and they identified, oh, why are they presenting this work? That's so and so's work. And so then that has a negative, or it can have a backfire effect.
I would say where it is appropriate, where it is a benefit, is in your letter of interest. You can talk about it, talk about that experience, share how it's shaped, how you think about your work, what skills you learned. That is a really great thing to showcase in that letter.
Yeah, I would agree. It's good experience, but don't feel you need to show it in the portfolio.
Yeah, difference between the letter and the portfolio.
What is considered your best work? Does it include non-public arts such as artwork that has been featured in galleries, museums, etc.?
I think it can. Your best work can be artwork that has been featured in galleries and museums.
Yeah.
Again, we want to see your work.
If we have just concepts for public art in digital 3D format, but have not worked with materials, would one still be able to move forward with a proposal?
I think again, a portfolio that is primarily concepts, I would say that's going to be hard. If you have studio work, if you have work you have completed and finished, non-public art doesn't have to be public art. Showcase, photograph that in the best light you can, showcase that, talk about how you could see that translating into a public art piece in your letter. Talk about how that could translate into different materials. But I don't think applying with just concepts, or even with mostly concepts, even if they're not proposals, I think they want to see your creative output, whether it's public art or not.
When submitting for public art RFQs, is it okay to include images of large-scale private commissions? Those that might not necessarily be available for the public to experience. but works that still demonstrate ability to make large work tailored to a specific client. I saw you not. Pat.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
And then I think we're at our last question. It's the question regarding AI. They just said, is that a yes to utilize AI for concept art if creating with the AI tool? I think what they're asking is, they are using it as a medium to create their artwork. And that would be yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of an artist that I follow, that I know personally, whose work I actually have seen and so on. And this artist has turned to AI, and I'm finding the evidence of that work as it happens through social media. The artist has come up with these really strict or specific ways of feeding queries to AI, and that's part of the framework. It's the concept of the work is around how this artist is identifying the prompts for AI, and then they edit what AI returns. It's very much a tool that they're using, and I don't know how they intend to ultimately present this work, but I could imagine it being printed out and framed and hung somewhere, or I could imagine it existing completely digitally. I don't know how they intend to use it, but certainly I can, and I think they have made a case for their use of AI as part of their art practice.
That is the end of our Q&A. And again, what an amazing job, Allie, in navigating us through that to a perfectly on time point. So thank you for that. And also a massive thank you to Irene for joining us in this conversation, for sharing her expertise, her perspectives, her many years of experience. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. I really appreciate it. And Pat, to you as well for coming in and providing some county perspectives, and also your years of experience perspectives. You are not just a voice for the county. You have a lot of experience as well. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to see what comes from all of this. Great proposals.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Real quickly, just up on the screen, again, as I've mentioned, this is an iterative program. We are going to be doing a whole nother workshop series next year. So if there are things that you think we could do better, that we could build into this, if you've looked at it and said, well, hey, we want to know more about this, or could we do a session on this, please feel free to email us at info@dysonwomack.com. We would love to hear your ideas. We would love to make sure that we are tailoring these sessions to the real needs of the artists in our community. Sessions coming up next week, going in with contracts, is going to be a great session. Virginia, I had the privilege of looking at some of her slides today, and you don't want to miss it. This is going to be a great conversation too. So that's us. Good night.